The sky over Muzdalifa was a pristine, unbroken azure, the kind of perfect spring afternoon that felt tailor-made for childhood. The air smelled of blooming cherry blossoms and the faint, sweet scent of warm crepes wafting from a nearby vendor. To a casual observer, the city was a thriving metropolis of peace, a testament to the safety promised by the golden age of heroes. 7-year-old Izuku Midoriya was skipping, his oversized red sneakers slapping against the sun-baked pavement. His small hand was wrapped tightly in his mother's. Inko Midoriya smiled down at her son, her emerald eyes crinkling at the corners. She looked tired, the kind of deep, bone-weary exhaustion that came from raising a child alone, but her gaze was infinitely soft. And then, Mom! Izuku babbled, his voice a mile-a-minute rush of unbridled enthusiasm. His free hand waved wildly in the air, mimicking an action figure. All Might came in from the sky. Smash! Like this. And the sludge monster was all whoosh, and the wind blew away the clouds. Did you see it on the news? Did you? It was super amazing. I saw it, Izuku, Inko chuckled, giving his hand a gentle squeeze. He was very brave. Just like my little man. Izuku's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a fleeting shadow passing over his freckled face. It had been nearly 3 years since the doctor's visit, 3 years since the extra joint in his pinky toe had sealed his fate in a world that valued extraordinary abilities above all else. Quirkless. The words still echoed in his mind sometimes, usually when the other kids at the playground pushed him into the dirt, their hands crackling with small sparks or stretching in impossible ways. Kaken's explosions were getting bigger. Izuku's hands remained painfully, entirely normal, but Inko had been trying so hard. She bought him every piece of hero merchandise they could afford, baked his favorite katsudon, and never, ever looked at him with the pity he saw in the eyes of his teachers. I'm going to be a hero too, Mom, Izuku said, his voice dropping to a serious, determined register. He looked up at her, his large green eyes shining with an intensity that always took her breath away, even without a quirk. I'm going to save people with a smile. Inko's heart ached. She stopped walking and knelt down right there on the busy sidewalk, ignoring the passing pedestrians. She framed his soft face in her hands, her thumbs gently brushing over his freckles. I know you will, Izuku. You have the kindest heart in the whole world. That's the most important superpower of all. Izuku beamed, the shadow completely gone. Can we get ice cream before we go home? Inko laughed, a bright, musical sound. All right. But just one scoop. I don't want you ruining your dinner. They never made it to the ice cream parlor. It began not with a sound, but with a feeling. A deep, unnatural vibration that rattled the teeth in Izuku's skull and sent a tremor through the concrete beneath their feet. The birds in the nearby trees suddenly took flight in a chaotic, screeching mass, abandoning their branches. Then came the noise. It was a deafening, apocalyptic roar, the sound of concrete and steel tearing themselves apart. A mere 3 blocks away, a towering commercial high-rise suddenly buckled. The glass facade shattered outward in a billion glittering, deadly shards, raining down upon the panicked streets below like a crystalline monsoon. Villain attack! Someone screamed, the voice cracking in sheer terror. Run! Oh my God, the building is coming down! Izuku froze. His mind, usually so quick to analyze quirks and hero strategies, blanked. The sheer scale of the destruction was paralyzing. A massive shockwave rippled through the air, carrying with it a suffocating cloud of pulverized concrete, ash, and the metallic tang of ruptured gas lines. Izuku! Inko shrieked. Her gentle demeanor vanished, instantly replaced by the primal, fierce instinct of a mother protecting her young. She grabbed his arm, nearly hauling him off his feet, and began to run. The crowd around them had devolved into a mindless, trampling stampede. People were screaming, shoving, desperate to escape the epicenter of the quake. Izuku stumbled, his short legs unable to keep up with the frantic pace. He looked back over his shoulder. Through the billowing dust, he saw the villain. It was a hulking, terrifying figure, its body covered in jagged, pulsating geometric plates that glowed with a sick, violet light. With every step the villain took, the ground heaved and fractured. Local heroes were already on the scene, Izuku recognized the minor pro-hero backdraft trying to manage the ensuing fires, and Death Arms attempting to corral the villain, but they were hopelessly outmatched. The villain let out a guttural roar, slamming its massive fists into the ground. Another shockwave hit. The street beneath Inko and Izuku violently buckled. The asphalt snapped like a brittle cracker. Izuku was thrown into the air, the grip of his mother's hand violently torn away. He hit the ground hard, the air driven from his small lungs in a harsh gasp. His ears were ringing, a high-pitched whine that drowned out the screaming around him. He blinked, his vision swimming, the world reduced to a haze of gray dust and angry orange flames. "Mom?" he rasped, coughing as the thick dust coated his throat. He pushed himself up on trembling arms. "Mom!" Izuku! Inko was 10 feet away. She was bleeding from a cut on her forehead, her clothes torn, but her eyes were locked onto him with a desperate, terrifying intensity. She scrambled toward him over the fractured pavement. Above them, a horrific groaning sound echoed. Izuku looked up. The facade of the office building directly next to them, destabilized by the villain's relentless seismic shocks, was giving way. A massive slab of reinforced concrete, easily weighing several tons, sheared off the side of the structure. It was falling. And it was falling directly toward Izuku. Time seemed to slow to an agonizing crawl. Izuku stared up at the descending shadow, his mind finally processing what was about to happen. He couldn't move. His legs were made of lead. He opened his mouth to scream, but no sound came out. Is this it? His childlike mind wondered, a terrifyingly lucid thought cutting through the panic. I didn't even get to try. No! The scream was feral. A blur of green and white slammed into Izuku. It was Inko. She didn't try to pull him away. There wasn't enough time. Instead, she threw her body entirely over his, curling herself into a tight, protective dome. She pressed his face into her chest, her arms wrapping around him with an iron grip that he would remember for the rest of his life. I love you, Izuku, she whispered fiercely into his hair. Then, the world ended. The impact was a cataclysm of noise and pressure. The ground shattered beneath them. Izuku felt a terrifying, crushing weight bear down upon them, followed by an explosion of agony in his left arm. The darkness swallowed him instantly. The air was choked with dust, so thick it felt like trying to breathe underwater. He was trapped in a tiny, suffocating pocket of darkness. The weight above him was immense, pressing down with a cruel, indifferent gravity. But he was alive. Mom? Izuku coughed, his voice a weak, pathetic squeak in the pitch black. He tried to move, but his mother's arms were still locked around him. He shifted his head, his cheeks scraping against her shirt. It was wet. A warm, sticky fluid was soaking through her blouse, dripping onto his face. The metallic smell of copper overwhelmed the scent of smoke and dust. Mom? He said again, his voice trembling. Panic, cold and sharp, began to claw at his chest. Mom, please. It's heavy. Mom, wake up. Inko Midoriya did not answer. The arms holding him had gone completely, terrifyingly slack. Mom, please. Izuku sobbed, his small hands pushing against her chest. Help. Somebody help. My mom won't wake up. Help. He screamed until his throat felt like it was bleeding, until the dust choked his lungs and made him gag. He screamed for all might. He screamed for anyone, but the only response was the shifting groan of the rubble above him, threatening to collapse entirely and finish the job. He was surrounded by darkness, suffocating on the smell of blood and pulverized stone, clutching the lifeless body of the only person in the world who believed in him. He closed his eyes, the tears cutting clean tracks through the grime on his face, and waited to die. High above the chaos, cutting through the smog and smoke like a golden javelin, was pro-hero Ryukyu. Ryuko Tatsuma, currently ranked as the number 9 hero in Japan, was having a terrible day. She had been patrolling the neighboring district, finalizing some paperwork for her agency, when the emergency alerts flared. The seismic villain had appeared without warning, possessing a quirk far more destructive than standard street-level thugs. She was flying at maximum speed, her massive, reptilian wings beating the air with a force that rattled the windows of the buildings she passed. In her draconic form, she was a creature of terrifying majesty. Towering scales of pale gold and deep, shimmering crimson armored her body. Her jaw, lined with teeth the size of combat knives, was set in a grim snarl. Her golden, slitted eyes scanned the destruction below. It was a war zone. The seismic shocks had leveled 3 city blocks. Plumes of black smoke choked the skyline. Damn it, Ryuko thought, her draconic vocal cords vibrating with a low, rumbling growl of frustration. I'm too late. The damage is already catastrophic. She folded her massive wings and entered a steep dive, aiming directly for the epicenter of the quakes. The villain was still rampaging, currently holding Death Arms by the throat, preparing to deliver a point-blank seismic blast to the hero's chest. With a roar that shook the very foundations of the city, Ryukyu struck. She didn't bother with finesse. She descended like a meteor, her massive, clawed feet slamming directly into the villain's back. The impact generated a shockwave of its own, cratering the street and instantly shattering the villain's violet armor plates. The villain choked, dropping Death Arms, and was driven face first into the asphalt with the force of a freight train. Ryukyu pinned the villain beneath her massive hind leg, her claws digging deep into the concrete to anchor herself. She leaned down, bringing her massive, horned head inches from the villain's face, exhaling a hot gust of air that smelled of ozone and fire. Move a muscle, Ryukyu snarled, her voice a booming, terrifying baritone that echoed down the ruined street, and I will bite you in half. The villain, thoroughly outmatched and likely nursing several broken ribs, wisely chose to pass out. Ryukyu immediately shifted her focus, her golden eyes darting across the wreckage. Death Arms. Status. The muscular hero coughed, rubbing his bruised throat. I'll live. But Ryukyu, the casualties, it happened too fast. The buildings. Ryuko didn't need him to finish. Her draconic senses were far sharper than a human's. Her ears swiveled, picking up the groans of the injured, the shifting of unstable concrete, the roar of the fires. And then, her sense of smell caught it. Blood. So much blood. A primal, instinctual part of her quirk, the part that beat within the heart of an ancient, mythological beast, twitched. Dragons, in lore and in the deep biological coding of her mutation, were territorial. They were protectors of their horde. And as a hero, humanity was her horde. Every life lost was a failure of her horde, a theft of her treasure. She released the unconscious villain to the approaching police officers and began to move through the wreckage. She carefully used her massive claws to lift slabs of concrete, pulling survivors from crushed cars and collapsed storefronts. Her massive size, usually a hindrance in delicate rescue operations, was perfect for moving debris that would take machinery hours to clear. As she moved toward the remains of a commercial office building, her golden eyes narrowed. Her ears twitched. Beneath the overwhelming cacophony of sirens and crackling fire, she heard it. It was incredibly faint. A muffled, raspy whimpering. Ryukyu scrambled over the uneven terrain, her massive tail balancing her weight. She stopped in front of a colossal pile of debris, the sheer, fallen facade of the building. The scent of blood here was overwhelmingly sharp, metallic and fresh. Quiet! Ryukyu boomed to the surrounding rescue workers. Silence fell over the immediate area, save for the ambient crackle of fire. Ryukyu lowered her massive head to the rubble, pressing her scaled ear against the pulverized concrete. Please wake up. It was a child. Ryuko's heart lurched. She stood up, her claws extending. There is someone under here. Get the medics ready. She began to dig. She had to be agonizingly careful. The rubble was a giant game of Jenga. One wrong move and the entire pile would collapse inward, crushing whatever pocket of air the survivor was trapped in. She used the tips of her claws, delicate despite their size, to slide pieces of rebar and concrete away. 10 minutes of agonizing, painstaking work passed. Finally, she grasped a massive, flat slab of reinforced concrete that served as the roof of the collapsed pocket. She dug her claws underneath the edge, her massive shoulder muscles bulging beneath her scales. With a grunt of effort, she hoisted the slab upward and tossed it aside. The sunlight pierced the darkness of the hole. Ryuko leaned down, her golden eyes adjusting to the shadows. What she saw made the breath catch in her massive chest. Laying amidst the dust and shattered stone was a woman with green hair. Her body was contorted at an unnatural angle, her back having taken the full, devastating force of the falling building. It was immediately, tragically obvious to Ryuko that the woman was dead. She had been crushed instantly. But beneath the woman, shielded by the arch of her broken body, was a small boy. He was incredibly small, maybe 7 or 8 years old. His clothes were torn, his left arm was bruised a dark, angry purple, and he was covered head to toe in a thick layer of gray dust. He was clutching the dead woman's shirt in his small fists, his knuckles white. The sudden influx of light made the boy flinch. He slowly turned his head, his wide, tear-streaked green eyes looking up. He didn't scream at the sight of the giant dragon looming over him. He just looked at her, his eyes hollow, empty, and filled with a despair so profound it felt like a physical blow to Ryuko's chest. "Are you a hero?" the boy whispered, his voice completely broken. Can you fix my mom? She won't wake up." Ryuko felt a horrible, twisting pain in her gut. The dragon within her roared in fury at the injustice of it, at the cruelty of a world that would force a child to endure this. But as a hero, she had to be strong. Slowly, Ryuko shrank. The golden scales receded, the massive wings folded and melted into her back, the terrifying maw shifting back into the features of a beautiful young woman with blonde hair and slit pupil eyes. She dropped down into the crater, ignoring the sharp rocks tearing at her hero costume. She knelt beside the boy and gently, oh so gently, reached out to him. "I'm so sorry, little one," Ryuko whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I am a hero. But I can't fix her. I'm so sorry." Izuku stared at her. The words seemed to take a moment to process. When they finally did, the last remaining light in his emerald eyes extinguished. He didn't cry out again. He simply let go of his mother's shirt, his small hands dropping to his sides, and went entirely limp. Ryuko acted on pure instinct. She reached forward and scooped the small, dusty boy into her arms. He felt impossibly light, as fragile as a bird with a broken wing. She pulled him against her chest, wrapping her arms securely around him. "Medics!" Ryuko shouted, turning her head toward the lip of the crater, her voice carrying a terrifying, unquestionable authority. "I need a medic down here, now!" She looked down at the boy in her arms. He had buried his face in the fabric of her costume, his small body trembling violently, though he made no sound. Ryuko tightened her grip, her reptilian eyes flashing with a fierce, protective light. I was too late to save her, Ryuko thought, the guilt burning like acid in her veins. But I have you. I have you. The hospital smelled of bleach, rubbing alcohol, and the quiet, sanitized despair that always followed a villain attack. Ryuko Tatsuma sat in a plastic chair outside of room 314, her long legs crossed, her chin resting on her hand. She was still in her hero costume, though she had wiped the worst of the dust and grime from her face. Her agency manager had called her phone 8 times in the last 3 hours, demanding she return to handle the press conference regarding the seismic villain. She had ignored every single call. The door to the hospital room clicked open, and a tired-looking doctor in a white coat stepped out. He saw Ryukyu and paused, slightly intimidated by the presence of a top 10 pro hero in the pediatric ward. "How is he?" Ryuko asked, standing up. Her voice was calm, but her slitted eyes were intense. "Physically, he will recover," the doctor said, flipping through a clipboard. "He has a fractured radius in his left arm, some minor lacerations, and mild smoke inhalation. He's malnourished, but nothing life-threatening. He's a very lucky boy." His mother, she absorbed the entirety of the impact. "It's a miracle he wasn't crushed alongside her." "And mentally?" Ryuko asked softly. The doctor sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "He's in deep shock. We've had to sedate him slightly to keep him calm. The police are currently trying to locate any next of kin. So far, the father is listed as working overseas, but the contact numbers are dead ends. No grandparents on record. If we don't find family within the next 48 hours, he'll be remanded to the state foster system." Ryuko's jaw tightened. The foster system. She knew the statistics. She knew what happened to traumatized children thrown into underfunded government facilities, especially those without powerful quirks to protect themselves. "Does he have a quirk?" Ryuko asked. The doctor glanced at the file. "Medical records indicate he was diagnosed quirkless 3 years ago." Ryuko felt a cold stone drop in her stomach. Quirkless. In today's society, being quirkless was akin to walking around with a target on your back. It meant bullying, discrimination, and being relegated to the absolute bottom of the social hierarchy. And now, he was an orphan, traumatized and utterly alone. "Can I see him?" she asked. "Just for a few minutes," the doctor said. "He needs to rest." Ryuko nodded and pushed open the heavy wooden door. The room was dimly lit, the only light coming from the moonlight filtering through the blinds and the soft, rhythmic beep of the heart monitor. Izuku was lying in the center of the large hospital bed, looking even smaller than he had in the rubble. His left arm was wrapped in a thick white cast. He was awake, but his eyes were fixed blankly on the ceiling. Ryuko walked over to the side of the bed, her boots making no sound on the linoleum floor. She pulled up a chair and sat down. "Hello, Izuku," she said softly. The police had given her his name. Izuku Midoriya. Izuku didn't look at her. He just continued to stare at the ceiling. "My name is Ryuko," she continued, her voice gentle, completely devoid of the booming confidence she used as a pro-hero. "My hero name is Ryukyu. I'm the one who pulled you out." Izuku slowly turned his head. His eyes, completely devoid of the childlike wonder they had likely held just hours ago, met hers. "You're the Dragoon hero," he whispered. His voice was hoarse, raspy from screaming and dust. "Rank number 9. You can turn into a dragon. Your strength is unmeasurable." Ryuko blinked, genuinely surprised. Most 7-year-olds barely knew hero names beyond All Might and Endeavor, let alone her specific ranking in quirk mechanics. "You know a lot about heroes, Izuku." "I take notes," Izuku said softly, looking away. She bought me a notebook. To write about heroes. So I could be one." The mention of his mother caused a fresh wave of tears to well up in his eyes, spilling silently over his bruised cheeks. He didn't sob. The quietness of his crying was somehow worse than screaming. Ryuko reached out, her hand hovering over his uninjured arm before gently resting on his shoulder. Her thumb stroked his hospital gown. She didn't offer empty platitudes. She didn't tell him it was going to be all right, or that his mother was in a better place. Children were smarter than adults gave them credit for. They knew when they were being lied to. "You survived," Ryuko said softly. "Your mother gave her life so that you could live. That makes your life incredibly precious, Izuku. Do you understand that?" Izuku sniffled, his small hand reaching up to wipe at his eyes. "But I don't have a quirk. I couldn't do anything. I'm useless." "Having a quirk doesn't make you a hero," Ryuko said firmly, her golden eyes locking onto his. "I know heroes with flashy, powerful quirks who are cowards, and I know people without quirks who show more bravery in a single day than most pros do in a lifetime. Your mother didn't have a strength quirk, did she?" Izuku shook his head slowly. She could pull small things to her. Like toys. "And yet she held up a building long enough to save you," Ryuko said. "That is a hero, Izuku. Quirks don't dictate your worth." She reached into one of the pouches on her utility belt. Earlier, when she had transformed back into her human state, one of the smaller, golden scales from her gauntlet area had shed, a natural, painless occurrence, but she usually discarded them. This time, she had kept it. She held out her hand, opening her palm. The golden scale, about the size of a large coin, shimmered in the dim light of the hospital room. It was incredibly hard, yet warm to the touch. "Dragons are very protective of the things they care about," Ryuko said softly, taking Izuku's small, uninjured right hand and placing the scale into his palm. She closed his fingers around it. "This is a piece of my armor. As long as you have this, you aren't alone. Do you understand?" Izuku looked down at his closed fist, clutching the golden scale as if it were a lifeline. He looked back up at her, his green eyes still swimming with tears, but a tiny, microscopic spark of something else, gratitude, perhaps, flickered within them. He nodded slowly. "Thank you, Ryukyu-san. Rest now, Izuku," she murmured, standing up. "I'll come back to check on you." As Ryuko walked out of the hospital into the cool night air, she felt a profound, restless energy burning in her chest. Her draconian instincts were screaming at her. She had given the boy a piece of her hoard. In the archaic, biological language of her quirk, that meant something. It meant a claim. She pulled out her phone and finally dialed her agency manager. Ryuko! Kyotoka's voice blared through the speaker. Where the hell have you been? The press is having a field day. The seismic villain is in custody, but the property damage is astronomical. We need a statement. Draft a statement, Ryuko said coldly, her voice brokering no argument. Tell them I am deeply saddened by the loss of life and am working closely with the authorities to ensure the victims are supported. Fine. Are you coming back to the agency? No, Ryuko said. She looked back up at the illuminated window of room 314. I need you to contact our legal department. I need to know everything there is to know about the foster care system in the Mizurufu prefecture. Expedited adoption protocols, word of the state loopholes, everything. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Ryuko, what are you doing? My job, Ryuko said simply, and hung up. 3 weeks later, the Sunrise Sunflower Orphanage was an ironically named institution. It was a bleak, brutalist concrete building situated on the dreary outskirts of Mizurufu, perpetually shadowed by an overpass. The paint was peeling, the chain-link fence surrounding the dirt playground was rusted, and the air inside smelled of boiled cabbage and cheap disinfectant. It was a dumping ground for the children's society didn't know what to do with. Izuku sat alone on a rusted swing in the corner of the yard. The cast on his arm had been replaced by a lighter brace, but the bruises on his soul had only deepened. He was wearing an oversized gray t-shirt and faded shorts, his unruly green curls hanging limp over his eyes. In his lap rested a charred, slightly water-damaged notebook. Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 6. It was the only possession he had recovered from his ruined apartment. He gripped a stubby pencil, trying to write. He was trying to sketch the seismic villain, trying to break down the shockwave radius, but his hand kept shaking. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the roar of the building collapsing. He smelled the dust. He felt his mother's arms go slack. Hey, look! It's the quirkless loser! Izuku flinched, pulling the notebook closer to his chest. 3 older boys, maybe 10 or 11, were swaggering across the dirt yard toward him. The leader, a boy with patches of stone-like scales on his face, sneered at him. What you drawing, Deku? The boy taunted, using the cruel nickname the kids here had given him after looking at the kanji for his name. Drawing pictures of heroes coming to adopt you? Newsflash. Nobody wants a broken toy. Especially one without a quirk. Izuku stared down at his sneakers, biting his lips so hard he tasted copper. Don't cry, he told himself. Heroes don't cry. Give me that, the stone-faced boy snapped, snatching the notebook from Izuku's lap. No! Please! Izuku cried out, scrambling to his feet. Give it back! It's mine! Whoa, look at this nerd crap, the boy laughed, flipping through the meticulously drawn pages. He actually thinks he can be a hero. Look at these notes. Weakness, blind spots. You think you're a genius or something, Deku? Please, Izuku begged, tears springing to his eyes despite his best efforts. That's all I have left. The boy smirked, holding the notebook up high. If you want it, jump for it. Izuku jumped, reaching for the book, but the boy shoved him hard in the chest. Izuku stumbled backward, tripping over the swing set chain, and fell hard into the dirt, scraping his knees. The other 2 boys laughed cruelly. You're pathetic, the leader sneered. He raised his hand, intending to throw the notebook over the rusted fence into the busy street. I suggest you put that down. The voice cut through the clamor of the playground like a crack of thunder. It wasn't loud, but it resonated with a terrifying, primal frequency that made every hair on the back of Izuku's neck stand up. The 3 bullies froze. They turned slowly toward the chain-link fence. Standing on the other side of the gate was a woman. She was tall, and possibly elegant, wearing a sleek, tailored crimson trench coat over a high-collared black shirt. Her blonde hair was tied back, and her eyes, golden, piercing, with vertical slits for pupils, were locked onto the older boy with an intensity that promised absolute violence. Izuku gasped. Ryukyu-san? Ryuko didn't look at Izuku yet. She opened the rusted gate, the metal screaming in protest as she pushed it aside. She walked into the yard, her heels clicking ominously on the concrete path before stepping onto the dirt. She towered over the bullies. I believe, Ryuko said, her voice dropping into a low, draconic rumble that visibly shook the stone-faced boy, that belongs to him. Hand it to me. Now. The boy, suddenly realizing he was standing face to face with the number 9 pro hero, went pale. He practically shoved the notebook into Ryuko's hand and bolted, his 2 friends right behind him. Ryuko watched them run, her eyes narrowed in disgust. Then, her expression softened entirely as she turned and knelt in the dirt in front of Izuku. Her expensive coat dragged in the dust, but she didn't care. Hello, little Drake, she said softly. Izuku sat in the dirt, staring at her with wide, disbelieving eyes. He slowly reached into his pocket, his fingers brushing against the smooth, hard surface of the golden scale he carried with him everywhere. He had thought she had forgotten about him. He thought the scale was just a trinket, a token of pity from a hero who had moved on to save more important people. Ryuko looked down at the notebook in her hand. The cover was damaged, but she opened it, flipping through the pages. Her breath caught. She had expected childish doodles, stick figures with capes. Instead, she found incredibly detailed, almost architectural sketches of hero costumes. There were paragraphs of dense, cramped handwriting analyzing quirk activation times, environmental advantages, and combat psychology. She turned to a page heavily bookmarked. It was a drawing of her. Her dragon form. Dragoon hero, Ryukyu, the childish handwriting read. Quirk, dragon. Super strength, flight, durability. Weakness, large wingspan makes tight alleyways dangerous. Relies heavily on overwhelming force. If villain is evasive, she struggles to pivot quickly mid-air. Needs support heroes to corral fast targets. Ryuko stared at the page. She was a professional hero with a team of highly paid tactical analysts, and this 7-year-old boy had pinpointed her exact aerial combat weakness in a spiral-bound notebook. She looked up at Izuku, who was watching her nervously, waiting to be scolded for analyzing a pro. Izuku, Ryuko said, her voice hushed with genuine awe. Did you write this? He nodded timidly, wiping dirt from his cheek. I'm sorry. I know it's stupid. I'm quirkless, so I just watch. Stupid? Ryuko echoed. She snapped the notebook shut, holding it carefully. Izuku, this isn't stupid. This is brilliant. You have a mind for strategy that most sidekicks in my agency don't possess. Izuku blinked. No adult had ever praised him for his notes. They usually just told him to stop muttering and pay attention to reality. Ryuko shifted closer, placing a hand on his small, trembling shoulder. The last few weeks. I've been thinking about you a lot. Dragons are territorial, Izuku. We build hordes. We protect what is ours. And when I pulled you out of that rubble, my instincts screamed at me that you belonged in my horde. Izuku didn't fully understand the metaphor, but the intensity in her golden eyes made his heart pound against his ribs. I have spent the last 3 weeks tearing through a mountain of legal red tape, fighting judges, and using every ounce of leverage my rank affords me, Ryuko continued, her voice fierce and unwavering, because I am not going to let a mind as brilliant as yours, and a heart as brave as yours, rot in a place like this. Izuku's breath hitched. He stared at her, terrified to hope, terrified that this was a cruel dream and he was about to wake up in his lumpy, cold bed. What do you mean? Ryuko reached into the pocket of her trench coat and pulled out a thick stack of folded, stamped legal documents. I am officially an unmarried pro-hero with a high-risk lifestyle, which means the state did not want to give you to me. Ryuko smiled, a sharp, slightly predatory grin that showed off her pointed teeth. But I threatened to buy this entire orphanage and fire the administration if they didn't expedite my paperwork. So, they compromised. She held the papers out. I am officially your legal foster guardian, Izuku. And if you'll allow it, in a year's time, when the probationary period is over, I intend to fully adopt you. Izuku stared at the papers. The stark black ink on the official government letterhead blurred as tears, hot, uncontrollable, overwhelming tears, flooded his eyes. He looked up at Ryuko, the golden-haired hero who had fallen from the sky like an avenging angel, who had given him a piece of her armor, and who was now offering him a life. Why? Izuku choked out, his voice cracking. I'm quirkless. I'm broken. Ryuko's eyes softened. She reached forward and pulled him into her chest, wrapping her arms around him just as she had in the crater. You aren't broken, Izuku, she whispered into his wild green hair. You were just forged in a fire that most people could never survive. Dragons hoard treasure, Izuku. Gold, jewels, precious things. And to me, a boy who can look at the world so analytically, who wants to save people purely out of the goodness of his heart despite having no power, that is the rarest treasure of all. Izuku couldn't hold it back anymore. He buried his face in her expensive crimson coat, gripped the fabric with his small, scarred hands, and wailed. All the grief, the terror, the agonizing loneliness of the last 3 weeks poured out of him in a torrent of heartbreaking sobs. Ryuko simply held him, her chin resting on his head, her eyes glaring fiercely at anyone who dared to look out the windows of the orphanage at them. She was a dragon, and this was her hatchling now. Come on, Ryuko said softly after his sobs had finally subsided into exhausted hiccups. She stood up, easily lifting him into her arms. He didn't weigh nearly enough. She was going to have to feed him properly. Where are we going? Izuku mumbled, his head resting heavily against her shoulder. Home, Ryuko said, turning her back on the Sunrise Sunflower Orphanage forever. To the agency. I have a team of sidekicks who are incredibly eager to meet you, and tomorrow, we start your martial arts training. Izuku lifted his head weakly, blinking in confusion. Martial arts? Ryuko smiled down at him, her slit pupils narrowing in a predatory, excited gleam. You said you want to be a hero, didn't you? Quirk or no quirk, if you are going to carry the Tatsuma name, you are going to know how to fight. I'm going to teach you how to move like a dragon, Izuku. We have a lot of work to do. As Ryuko carried him out the gates and toward a sleek black town car waiting at the curb, Izuku reached into his pocket one last time. His fingers traced the smooth edges of the golden scale. He looked back at the bleak orphanage, and then up at the clear, azure sky. He had lost everything. But as he pressed his face into the warm, secure shoulder of the dragoon hero, Izuku realized something profound. His mother had given him his heart. But Ryukyu was going to give him his fangs, and for the first time since the world had collapsed around him, Izuku Midoriya felt a tiny, flickering spark of fire ignite in his chest. The Ryukyu Hero Agency was not just a workplace. It was a fortress, a sanctuary, and most importantly a nest. Occupying the top 5 floors of a glittering, reinforced glass skyscraper in the heart of the bustling commercial district, it was designed to accommodate the sheer mass of its founder. Ceilings were vaulted, doorways were triple wide, and the training rooms were reinforced with the same titanium alloys used to construct bank vaults. For an 8-year-old boy who had spent the last month of his life in a cramped, gray orphanage, it felt like stepping into a castle in the clouds. Izuku Midoriya, now legally Izuku Tatsuma, though Ryuko never pressured him to use the name until he was ready, woke up to the smell of searing meat. This wasn't unusual. The sidekicks of the Ryukyu Agency had mutations and quirks heavily tied to reptilian, predatory, or strength-based genetics. The daily caloric intake required to keep the horde functioning was astronomical. Izuku rolled out of his oversized bed. His room was a vibrant clash of his past and his present. The walls were still plastered with vintage All Might posters, but interspersed among them were framed photographs of his new family. Ryukyu in her dragon form, letting a tiny Izuku ride on her massive snout. Group shots of the agency sidekicks at the beach, and his mother Inko, smiling softly from a silver frame on his nightstand. Ryuko had made sure the photo was the first thing Izuku saw when he woke up, and the last thing he saw before he slept. She refused to let him forget where he came from. He padded out of his room, his bare feet sinking into the plush, crimson carpets of the penthouse floor. Morning, pipsqueak, Izuku ducked instinctively. A second later, a scaly, iridescent green tail whipped through the space where his head had just been. Hanging upside down from the vaulted ceiling was Seraphina, hero name, Vipera. She was a lithe, athletic woman in her early 20s with patches of emerald snake scales along her cheekbones and arms, and eyes that lacked pupils entirely, appearing as solid pools of amber. She was the agency's premier stealth and infiltration specialist. Morning, Serene, Izuku smiled, straightening up. Your strikes are getting slower. Oh, big talk from a kid who still needs a step stool to reach the cereal, Vipera laughed, dropping gracefully from the ceiling and landing without a single sound. She ruffled his wild green hair, her scales cool against his skin. Come on. The boss is making breakfast. And Takashi is already threatening to eat the table if she doesn't hurry up. The kitchen was massive, dominated by an industrial-sized stove and a dining table cut from a single, massive slab of oak. Standing at the stove was Ryuko. She wore sweatpants and a tight black tank top, her blonde hair tied up in a messy bun. Even in domestic clothes, she exuded a quiet, dangerous power. Sitting at the table was Takashi, hero name, Gargoyle. He was a towering mountain of a man with skin resembling slate-gray stone and small, vestigial wings on his back. He was currently arm wrestling Kale, a sidekick with a raptor mutation quirk who went by the name Talon. Kale's clawed feet were braced against the table, his feathered crest flared in exertion. Give it up, bird brain, Takashi grunted, not even breaking a sweat. I have the leverage. Kale squawked. Enough, Ryuko said, not turning around. Her voice didn't rise in volume, but the low, thrumming baritone of her dragon chord immediately made both men freeze. You break another table, Takashi, and it's coming out of your hazard pay. Yes, boss, Takashi mumbled, releasing Kale's hand. Ryuko turned, a massive platter of steaks, eggs, and rice balanced in one hand. Her slitted, golden eyes found Izuku, and the sternness instantly melted from her face, replaced by a radiant, maternal warmth. Good morning, my little Drake, she said, setting the platter down and pulling out the chair beside her. Morning, Mom, Izuku said, taking his seat. The word Mom still felt heavy on his tongue sometimes, a ghost of a past life, but Ryuko had earned it. Every nightmare she had sat through, every tear she had dried, every time she had fiercely shielded him from the intrusive flashing cameras of the paparazzi. She was his mother in every way that mattered. Eat up, Ryuko commanded, piling food onto his plate. You're going to need the energy. Today, we start your physical conditioning. Izuku paused, a piece of egg halfway to his mouth. Conditioning? Like gym class? Vipera snorted from across the table, taking a bite of a raw steak. Gym class? Kid, you're in the horde now. We're going to teach you how to survive. Takashi leaned forward, his stone face serious. You don't have a quirk, Izuku. Out there, on the streets, villains won't care. They'll see a weakness and exploit it. If you're going to be a hero, you can't just be as good as a guy with a quirk. You have to be 10 times better. Ryuko sat down, placing a gentle hand on Izuku's back. I will never force you to fight, Izuku. If you want to be an analyst, or a police officer, or a baker, I will support you. But if you want to walk the path of a hero, it is going to be agony. It will be the hardest thing you've ever done. Are you ready for that? Izuku looked down at his hands. They were small, unblemished, normal. He thought of the building falling. He thought of the crushing weight of his own helplessness. He looked up, his green eyes burning with a fierce, unwavering light that made the surrounding sidekicks grin. I'm ready. Age 9, the forging. Izuku vomited into a metal bucket, his small body heaving violently. His lungs felt like they were stuffed with burning fiberglass. His muscles, pushed far beyond the limits of a normal 9-year-old, were screaming in agonizing rebellion. He was drenched in sweat, his knees trembling so badly he could barely stand. Breathe, Izuku, Talon instructed calmly, standing a few feet away on the reinforced training mat. The raptor mutant didn't look tired at all. In through the nose, out through the mouth. You're losing your rhythm. I can't, Izuku gasped, wiping his mouth with the back of a bruised hand. My legs, they won't. Your legs will do what your mind tells them to do, Vipera said from her perch on the wall bars. Pain is just information, kid. It's your body telling you you're reaching your limit. As a hero, your job is to acknowledge that information, and then completely ignore it. Izuku forced himself upright. His vision was swimming. They had been doing agility drills for 3 hours. No breaks. No water until he completed the circuit under 2 minutes. Again, Talon commanded, raising a sparring pad. Izuku let out a ragged yell and charged. He didn't have super speed. He didn't have explosive power. But he had a brain that absorbed information like a sponge. He remembered the angle of Talon's stance. He knew the avian hero favored his left side. Izuku fainted right, dropping his center of gravity dangerously low, and swept his leg out in a sweeping kick. Talon easily hopped over it, bringing the sparring pad down toward Izuku's head. But Izuku wasn't there. He had used the momentum of his missed kick to roll forward, springing up behind Talon and driving his small elbow into the back of Talon's knee, the exact pressure point Gargoyle had taught him the day before. Talon's leg buckled slightly. It wasn't enough to drop the adult hero, but it was enough to make him stumble. Izuku stood back, panting heavily, his fists raised in a textbook defensive guard. The training room was silent for a second. Then, Vipra began a slow clap. Talon grinned, rubbing the back of his knee. Well, I'll be damned, Talon chuckled. He actually used my blind spot. The heavy steel doors to the training room slid open. Ryukyu walked in, dressed in her hero costume minus the gauntlets. She surveyed the scene, Izuku pale and shaking, the bucket of vomit, the bruises forming on his arms. Her maternal instinct flared, a physical ache in her chest urging her to wrap him in a blanket and tell him to stop. But she forced it down. She was raising a survivor. She walked over to Izuku and knelt down, wiping the sweat from his forehead with a cool towel. You're bleeding, she noted softly, pointing to a scrape on his cheek. I fell during the parkour drill, Izuku panted, his chest heaving. Serene says I need to learn how to break my falls better. She's right, Ryukyu said. She looked him in the eyes. Do you want to stop? Izuku's eyes, bright and feral, met hers. Did you stop when you fought the acidic villain last week? Ryukyu smiled, a proud, fierce showing of fangs. No. I didn't. Then I'm not stopping, Izuku said, taking a shaky breath and turning back to Talon. Circuit 3. Let's go. Age 11, the brain of the dragon. The command center of the Ryukyu agency was a dimly lit, high-tech sanctuary filled with glowing monitors, police scanners, and holographic city maps. Usually it was staffed by 4 professional support technicians. Tonight, it was commandeered by an 11-year-old boy in an oversized All-Might hoodie. Izuku sat in the primary operator's chair, a headset clamped over his ears, his fingers flying across the dual keyboards with terrifying speed. In his lap was Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 14. On the main monitor, chaotic, shaky helicopter footage displayed a battle raging in an abandoned shipping yard. Ryukyu, in her full, massive dragon form, was currently pinned under a barrage of heavy artillery fire. The villain, a mercenary known as Shatterpoint, possessed a quirk that allowed him to manipulate the kinetic energy of anything he touched, effectively turning thrown rocks into cannonballs and rendering close-quarters combat suicidal. Vipra and Gargoyle were pinned behind a rusted shipping container, unable to advance. Boss is taking too much damage. Vipra's voice crackled through Izuku's headset, tight with panic. His fire rate is insane. He's not letting up. My armor is cracking, Izuku, Takashi's deep voice rumbled. We need an opening. Izuku's eyes darted frantically across the screens. He was watching the villain's movements, replaying the last 10 minutes of the fight at 2x speed on a side monitor. He was muttering under his breath, a rapid-fire stream of calculations. He's not breathing right, Izuku muttered, his eyes wide. Kinetic energy absorption, it requires a massive caloric burn. He's sweating profusely. His strikes are heavy, but look at his hands. Izuku zoomed in on the villain. Every time Shatterpoint touched a piece of debris to charge it, a faint, blue light pulsed up his arms. But the light was dimming, and his fingers were trembling. He's hitting his threshold, Izuku said, his voice suddenly crystal clear, cutting through the radio chatter with absolute authority. The stuttering, anxious boy of his childhood was completely gone when he was in the zone. Izuku slammed a button on the console. Serene. Takashi. Listen to me. He has a refractory period. Every time he fires a high-yield kinetic burst, he can't absorb new energy for exactly 2.4 seconds. It's getting longer as he gets tired. 2.4 seconds isn't enough time to close the distance, Izuku. Vipra shouted over the sound of an explosion. It is if you don't run, Izuku replied, a sharp grin pulling at the corner of his mouth. Mom, I hear you, little Drake, Ryukyu's monstrous, vibrating voice echoed through the comms. He's focusing on you because you're the biggest target. I need you to charge him. Full speed. Force him to use a maximum yield burst to stop you. Izuku, if that hits her head on, Takashi started. It won't, Izuku interrupted. Mom, the moment he fires, drop your form. Shrink. The kinetic blast will go right over you. Takashi, the second he fires, you throw Serene. Fastball special. You'll have exactly 3 seconds before he can charge another rock. There was a moment of hesitation on the comms. It was a wildly dangerous maneuver. It required absolute, blind trust. Understood, Ryukyu growled. Execute. Izuku watched the monitor with bated breath. Ryukyu let out a deafening roar, her massive wings flaring as she charged straight at the villain like a golden freight train. Shatterpoint panicked, his eyes going wide. He grabbed a massive steel I-beam, his arms glowing violently blue, and hurled it at her with the force of a missile. The instant the beam left his hands, Ryukyu vanished. She deactivated her quirk, her massive form shrinking into her human body in a fraction of a second. The kinetic I-beam shrieked through the empty air where her chest had just been, obliterating a crane behind her. Now! Izuku yelled. Gargoyle stepped out from cover, grabbed Vipra by the harness, and hurled her through the air with monstrous strength. Shatterpoint reached for another rock, but his arms sputtered, the blue light failing to ignite. The refractory period. Vipra sailed over his head, twisting midair. She dropped like a stone, wrapping her legs around the villain's neck in a vicious submission hold, and slammed him into the concrete. The villain went limp instantly. The comms were silent for a moment, save for the heavy breathing of the heroes. Target secured, Vipra panted. Good call, Overwatch. You saved our scales tonight, kid. Izuku let out a breath he didn't know he was holding, collapsing back into the leather chair. A wide, exhausted smile spread across his face. An hour later, the penthouse doors slid open. The heroes, battered, bruised, and covered in soot, filed in. Ryuko was the last one through the door. She looked exhausted, her hero costume torn at the shoulder, but her golden eyes found Izuku immediately. He was waiting in the foyer, holding a first aid kit. Ryuko walked over to him, dropping to one knee so she was at eye level with her son. She didn't say a word. She just reached out and pulled him into a fierce, crushing hug. You were our eyes tonight, Izuku, she whispered, her voice thick with pride. You protected the Horde. Thank you. Izuku hugged her back, burying his face in her shoulder. I'll always protect you, Mom. Always. Age 12, the dragon's pride. Aldera Junior High was an exercise in patience for Izuku. To the rest of the school, he was still Deku. The quirkless kid. The anomaly. The teachers ignored him, and the students actively avoided him, save for Katsuki Bakugo and his lackeys. Bakugo was a problem, but not in the way he used to be. When they were younger, Bakugo's explosions and loud yelling would send Izuku into a stuttering panic. But now, Izuku was raised by dragons. He spent his afternoons sparring with pro heroes who could crush boulders with their bare hands. He had analyzed the psychology of serial killers and watched his mother tear apart buildings to save civilians. Next to that, a middle schooler with an inferiority complex and sweaty palms was just loud. It was Tuesday afternoon. The bell had rung, and the classroom was emptying out. Izuku was packing his latest notebook, Volume 17, into his yellow backpack. A hand slammed down on his desk, an explosion crackling against the wood, leaving a scorched black mark. Hey, Deku, Bakugo sneered, his red eyes glaring down at Izuku. 2 of his lackeys stood behind him, snickering. I heard you applied to UA High. You think they're gonna let a quirkless nobody like you in? Don't make me laugh. Izuku didn't flinch. He didn't cower. He calmly finished zipping his backpack, slung it over his shoulder, and looked up at Bakugo. His green eyes were completely devoid of fear. They were cool, analytical, and eerily still. Yui removed the quirk requirement 2 years ago, Katsuki, Izuku said, his voice even and polite, yet carrying an underlying firmness that confused the explosive blonde. And considering I scored in the 99th percentile on the national mock written exams, my academic standing is solid. Bakugo's eye twitched. This was wrong. Deku was supposed to shake. Deku was supposed to cry. You think you're smart, huh? You think books are gonna save you when a villain turns you into paste? You're a pebble in my path. Bakugo lunged, His hand raised, small sparks popping from his palm, aiming to grab Izuku by the collar. Izuku moved. It wasn't a panic scramble. It was a fluid, perfectly calculated pivot. He shifted his weight, stepped inside Bakugo's guard, and gently but firmly slapped the inside of Bakugo's wrist, redirecting the explosive hand harmlessly past his ear. In the same motion, Izuku used his other hand to push lightly on Bakugo's chest, using the blonde's own forward momentum against him. Bakugo stumbled past the desk, nearly crashing into the chalkboard before he caught his balance. The classroom was dead silent. The lackeys stared, jaws unhinged. Izuku hadn't used a quirk. He hadn't even looked like he exerted effort. He had just swatted Aldera's strongest student aside like a nuisance fly. Izuku adjusted the strap of his backpack. Your right hook is too telegraphed, Katsuki. You drop your shoulder before you swing because you're channeling the nitroglycerin. Against a villain with a reflex quirk, they'd break your arm before you even sparked. Bakugo turned around, his face purple with absolute, unadulterated rage. Sparks flared violently from both hands. I'll kill you! No, you won't, Izuku said simply, his voice dropping an octave, carrying a faint imitation of Ryuko's draconic rumble. Because if you use your quirk on me outside of a sanctioned sparring ring, it's assault. It goes on your permanent record, and Yui rescinds your application before you even take the exam. Think, Katsuki. Bakugo froze. The logic hit him like a brick wall, warring with his explosive temper. He stood there, trembling with rage, his hands smoking, but he didn't attack. I'll see you at the entrance exam, Izuku said politely. He walked past Bakugo and out the door, not looking back. When Izuku returned to the penthouse that afternoon, he was quiet. He set his bag down and walked straight into the kitchen, grabbing a bottle of water. Ryuko was sitting at the kitchen island, nursing a cup of tea. She was in her civilian clothes, reading a briefing file. She glanced up, her slitted eyes immediately catching the tension in her son's shoulders. Rough day at school? She asked softly. Izuku sighed, leaning against the counter. Just Bakugo. He's so talented, Mom. His quirk is incredible. But he's so angry all the time. He thinks strength is the only thing that matters. Ryuko set her file down. She knew about Katsuki Bakugo. She had offered, on multiple occasions, to visit the school and gently explain to the boy and the administration why harassing her son was a terrible life choice. Izuku had always asked her not to, insisting he needed to fight his own battles. There are many kinds of strength, Izuku, Ryuko said, walking around the counter and standing in front of him. A fire can burn down a house, but it can also forge steel. Bakugo only knows how to burn. You know how to build. It's just frustrating, Izuku muttered, looking at his hands. Sometimes I wish I just had something. Even a weak quirk. Just so they would look at me like a person, and not a disease. Ryuko's expression softened into an expression of profound, aching love. She reached out, taking his chin in her hand and tilting his head up so he had to look at her. Listen to me, Izuku Tatsuma, she said, her voice fiercely gentle. You are more of a hero right now than 90% of the pros walking the streets. You have bled on the mats. You have pushed your body to the absolute breaking point. You have a mind that terrifies villains you haven't even met yet. She leaned in, pressing her forehead against his. You don't need a quirk to be a dragon, Izuku. You just need the heart. And your heart is the strongest thing I have ever seen. Izuku closed his eyes, leaning into her touch, a small, grateful smile gracing his lips. Thanks, Mom. Now, Ryuko said, pulling back with a dangerous, predatory grin. Go put on your training gear. Vipra said you missed a grappling hook deployment by 2 inches yesterday. We're going to fix that. Roof. 10 minutes. Age 13, the fangs bared. The roof of the Ryukyu agency building was a sprawling, reinforced helipad designed for high-altitude combat training. The wind howled up here, a relentless, biting gale that smelled of city smog and impending rain. Izuku stood at one end of the pad. He was 13 now, and the years of brutal conditioning had transformed him. He was no longer the scrawny, trembling child from the orphanage. He was lean, corded with dense swimmer's muscle. He wore a dark green, sleeveless tactical shirt, reinforced cargo pants, and a utility belt loaded with smoke pellets, stun batons, and specialized grappling hooks. His hands were wrapped in heavy, black combat tape. He bounced on his toes, his green eyes locked onto his opponent. Standing 30 feet away was Ryukyu. She was not in her full dragon form, as that would obliterate the roof. Instead, she was utilizing her hybrid form, a difficult, stamina-draining state she rarely used in public. She stood nearly 7 feet tall. Her skin was covered in patches of indestructible golden scales. Massive, leathery wings folded behind her back, and a thick, spiked tail whipped lazily behind her, cracking against the concrete. Her hands ended in terrifying, razor-sharp talons. Rules of engagement? Ryuko called out, her voice a deep, resonant purr. First to pin or disarm. Izuku shouted back over the wind, slipping into a low, defensive stance Takashi had taught him. No holding back, Mom. Ryuko laughed, a terrifying sound that sent a flock of pigeons scattering from a nearby building. I never do, little Drake. Come on. Izuku didn't hesitate. He charged. He knew he couldn't beat her in a test of strength. If she hit him squarely, he would break. The key was speed, misdirection, and utilizing the environment. As he closed the distance, he reached into his belt and hurled 3 smoke pellets at her feet. A thick, gray cloud erupted, obscuring her vision. Instantly, Izuku fired a grappling hook from his left gauntlet. It didn't aim for Ryuko. It aimed for the heavy ventilation unit behind her. The line caught, and Izuku hit the retraction button, launching himself into the air, soaring over the smoke cloud. As he flew over her, he unclipped a stun baton, thumbing the activation switch so it crackled with blue electricity. He aimed a vicious strike at the base of her neck, the only soft spot in her scales. But dragons don't just rely on sight. Ryuko's ear twitched. Without even looking up, her massive tail whipped upward like a golden whip. Smack! The tail caught Izuku midair, batting him away like a shuttlecock. Izuku grunted as the wind was knocked out of him. He released the grapple line and tucked into a tight roll, hitting the concrete and sliding several feet before popping back up, grimacing. Too loud, Izuku! Ryuko called out, stepping out of the smoke. The grapple wire hums when it retracts. A seasoned villain will hear it. Noted! Izuku yelled back. He didn't give her time to advance. He sprinted in a zigzag pattern, making himself a difficult target. Ryuko lunged, her taloned hand sweeping down in a devastating arc. Izuku slid on his knees, leaning back Matrix style. The talon sheared the air millimeters above his nose. Using his forward momentum, he popped up, pivoting sharply on his right foot, and delivered a brutal, spinning roundhouse kick directly to her knee joint. It was a perfect strike, delivered with maximum torque. Against a normal human, the knee would have shattered. Against Ryuko, it sounded like kicking a solid oak tree. Izuku winced as pain shot up his leg, but he didn't stop. Ryuko grabbed for him. Izuku ducked under her massive arm, drawing his second stun baton, and jammed both crackling batons directly into her unarmored ribcage. A surge of electricity poured into her side. Ryuko grunted, her muscles spasming involuntarily, and she dropped to one knee. For a split second, Izuku thought he had her. He moved to secure a pin, but a dragon's pride is a dangerous thing to wound. Ryuko's eyes flared with golden light. With a roar that shook the glass of the surrounding skyscrapers, she flared her massive wings. The sudden, violent gust of wind hit Izuku like a solid wall. He was thrown backward, tumbling head over heels until he slammed hard into the chain-link fence bordering the roof. Before he could even catch his breath, Ryuko was there. She pinned him to the fence, one massive, scaled hand pressing gently but firmly against his chest, her other hand holding both of his wrists securely above his head. Her face was inches from his, her golden slit pupils wide, her breath smelling of ozone. Izuku struggled for a second, then went limp, chest heaving, sweat dripping from his nose. I yield, he gasped, a breathless laugh escaping his lips. I yield. Ryuko stared at him for a long moment. Then, the scales receded. The wings melted away. The terrifying draconic features softened back into the face of his mother. She let go of his wrists and stepped back, offering him a hand. Izuku took it, and she pulled him to his feet. You got a hit in, Ryuko said, her voice filled with absolute awe. She rubbed her ribcage, where a faint red mark was visible. The electricity bypassed the scales. That was brilliant, Izuku. Izuku leaned against the fence, catching his breath. But you still won. I couldn't pin you. Izuku, I am the number 9 hero in the country, Ryuko laughed, wiping sweat from her brow. If a 13-year-old quirkless kid managed to pin me, I would have to retire out of sheer embarrassment. She stepped closer, placing her hands on his shoulders. She looked him up and down. The bruises, the sweat, the fierce, unyielding determination in his eyes. He had grown so much. The broken, dusty child she had pulled from the rubble was gone. In his place stood a warrior. A tactician? Her son. You're ready, she said softly. Izuku looked up at her, his eyes widening. Ready? For what? For the world, Ryuko smiled. Your final year of middle school starts next week. After that, you're high. You've learned everything we can teach you in the safety of this nest, Izuku. You know how to fight, you know how to think, and you know what it means to be a hero. She reached into her pocket. She pulled out a small, heavy silver chain. Dangling from it was a small piece of metal, cast to look like a folded dragon wing. In the center of the metal wing was set a single, gleaming golden scale, the very same scale she had given him in the hospital 6 years ago. She had taken it to a jeweler to have it set into a proper pendant. She stepped behind him and clasped the necklace around his neck. It rested warm and heavy against his chest, right over his heart. You carry the pride of the horde with you now, Izuku, Ryuko whispered, resting her chin on his shoulder, looking out at the sprawling city of Mizurufu below them. Whatever happens out there, you are never alone. You are a Tatsuma. Show them your fangs. Izuku gripped the pendant, the smooth gold grounding him. He looked out at the city. He knew villains lurked in those shadows. He knew society would still look down on him for being quirkless. He knew the road ahead was going to be agonizingly difficult. But as he stood on the roof of his home, feeling the presence of his mother behind him and the strength in his own muscles, Izuku Midoriya was not afraid. I will, Izuku promised, his voice carrying on the wind, a quiet, dangerous vow. I'll make you proud, Mom. He was Deku. He was quirkless. But he was raised by dragons, and he was ready to fly. The final bell of the day at Aldera Junior High didn't ring so much as it buzzed, a flat, electronic drone that signaled the release of 300 restless teenagers into the warm spring afternoon. 14-year-old Izuku Midoriya, known legally on the school's registry as Izuku Tatsuma, though he permitted only the faculty to use the surname, sat quietly at his desk in the back row, while his classmates erupted into chaotic chatter, tossing their textbooks into their bags and making plans for the arcade. Izuku methodically packed his things. He moved with a deliberate, practiced efficiency. Every pen, every notebook had a specific pouch in his reinforced tactical backpack. He wore the standard Aldera Gakuin uniform, but beneath the stiff black collar, the silver chain bearing his golden dragon scale rested securely against his sternum. Beneath the uniform jacket, out of sight of the faculty, he wore a custom-fitted, lightweight Kevlar weave vest, a birthday present from Vipera, and his wrists were banded with heavy, weighted bracers that doubled as concealable housings for his support gear. To the untrained eye, he was just a quiet, unassuming teenager with a mop of unruly green hair and a smattering of freckles. But the way he sat, the way his emerald eyes constantly tracked the exits and the micro-expressions of the students around him, spoke of a boy raised in the company of apex predators. All right, settle down, all of you. The homeroom teacher sighed, waving a stack of papers. You're all third years now. It's time to start thinking seriously about your futures. I'm supposed to hand out these career aptitude forms, but, let's be honest. You all want to be heroes, don't you? The classroom erupted. Quirks flared to life across the room, elongated fingers, minor pyrokinesis, levitating pencils. Yes, you all have wonderful quirks, the teacher drawled, placating them. But remember the rules against quirk usage in school. Now let's see. Bakugo. You're aiming for UA High School, aren't you? The chatter died down instantly. All eyes turned to the blonde sitting a few rows ahead of Izuku. Katsuki Bakugo leaned back in his chair, propping his feet up on his desk with an arrogant smirk. Don't lump me in with these background extras, teach. I'm not just aiming for UA. I'm gonna ace the entrance exam, break all their records, and surpass All Might himself. I'm the only one in this garbage school with the potential to be a top 10 pro. Ah, yes. You've certainly got the highest mock exam scores, the teacher noted, adjusting his glasses. He glanced down at his clipboard, his brow furrowing slightly. Oh, it looks like Midoriya is also applying for UA. A beat of utter silence fell over the classroom. Then laughter. Cruel, raucous laughter that echoed off the chalkboards. Izuku didn't so much as blink. He finished sipping his bag, his expression a mask of polite indifference. He was used to this. Ryukyu had warned him that the civilian world was narrow-minded. They equated biological lottery winnings with inherent worth. Izuku knew better. He had spent his weekend analyzing the structural weaknesses of a villain whose quirk allowed him to turn his skin into titanium, assisting Takashi in a flawless takedown. The laughter of middle schoolers was white noise. Bakugo, however, was not laughing. His crimson eyes twitched, a vein bulging in his neck. He stood up slowly, the legs of his chair scraping harshly against the linoleum floor. Deku, Bakugo growled, his voice a dangerous, low rumble. He marched down the aisle and slammed his hand flat onto Izuku's desk. A sharp crack of a miniature explosion scorched the wood, leaving a smoking black handprint. The smell of burnt sugar and ozone filled the air. What do you think you're doing? Bakugo sneered, leaning in close so Izuku could see the sparks dancing across his palms. You're quirkless. You're worse than the rest of these rejects. You think you can stand in the same ring as me? You think a few fancy martial arts moves make you a hero? Izuku looked up from his bag, his green eyes utterly devoid of the terror Bakugo so desperately wanted to see. The UA entrance exam evaluates practical combat, rescue points, and academic standing, Izuku replied, his voice calm, modulated, and crisp. My mock-written scores are in the 99th percentile nationwide, Katsuki. Furthermore, the Hero Public Safety Commission revised the UA Charter 2 years ago. The quirk requirement was abolished to accommodate those with severe mutation quirks that lack offensive capabilities, as well as quirkless individuals. My application is perfectly valid. Bakugo's jaw clenched. Izuku's complete lack of intimidation, his clinical, logical dismantling of Bakugo's rage, infuriated the blonde more than an actual punch to the face would have. Shut up with your nerd logic. Bakugo shouted, raising his right hand, sparks flaring violently. I'll incinerate that application before you even. Bakugo swung his hand toward Izuku's backpack, aiming to grab it and blow it to ash. He never made contact. Izuku's left hand shot out with terrifying, viper-like speed. He didn't grab Bakugo's explosive palm. He seized Bakugo's wrist directly beneath the joint, his thumb digging viciously into the radial nerve. In the same fluid motion, Izuku twisted his waist, using Bakugo's forward momentum against him, and applied a brutal, textbook joint lock Takashi had drilled into him for months. Bakugo let out a sharp gasp of pain as his arm was wrenched awkwardly behind his back, his face slammed down onto the surface of Izuku's desk. The sparks in his palm fizzled out instantly as his focus shattered. The classroom plunged into stunned, breathless silence. The teacher stood frozen at the podium. Izuku leaned in, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet whisper right next to Bakugo's ear. It wasn't the voice of a bully middle schooler. It was the voice of a boy who had been trained by the Dragoon Hero. Section 4, Article 12 of the Quirk Regulation Act, Izuku quoted softly. Unprovoked use of an offensive quirk on a civilian in a public space, especially one resulting in property damage, is a Class 3 felony. If I report this, you won't even look at your application, Katsuki. You have incredible potential. Stop acting like a street thug and start acting like a hero. Or the world is going to eat you alive. Izuku released the wrist and smoothly stood up, grabbing his backpack. Bakugo scrambled back, clutching his wrist, his red eyes wide with a mixture of shock, humiliation, and burning rage. I'll see you at the exam, Izuku said politely. He offered a slight bow to the pale, sweating teacher. Excuse me? I have training. He walked out of the classroom, his footsteps making no sound in the silent hallway. The spring air was refreshing as Izuku walked away from the school grounds. He took a slightly longer route home today, opting for the path that took him through the underpass. It was quieter, allowing him to pull out his phone and review the notes Talon had sent him regarding aerial trajectory evasion. I shouldn't have grabbed him, Izuku thought, clicking his tongue in self-reprimand. Vipera always says never engage unless provoked beyond de-escalation. But his explosions in an enclosed space. The collateral damage risk was too high. He was so deeply engrossed in his thoughts that he almost missed the sound. It was a wet, sloshing noise, like a massive boot stepping into thick mud, echoing from the darkened tunnel of the underpass ahead. The ambient temperature in the tunnel seemed to drop abruptly. The smell hit him next: raw sewage, swamp water, and rotting garbage. Izuku stopped dead in his tracks. His hand instinctively drifted to the hem of his uniform jacket, resting over the concealed utility belt at his waist. Threat detected, his mind catalogued instantly, years of conditioning kicking in. Odor suggests biological or fluid-based mutation. Movement sounds heavy, uncoordinated. From the manhole cover a few yards ahead, a massive geyser of dark, viscous green sludge erupted. It formed into a towering, gelatinous mass, two massive, bulbous eyes and a jagged set of teeth floating within the muck. A medium-sized invisibility cloak, the sludge villain rasped, its voice bubbling and wet. Perfect. You'll do nicely, kid. Don't fight it. It'll only hurt for about 45 seconds. I just need a meat suit to hide in. The villain lunged, a wave of suffocating sludge sweeping toward Izuku like a tidal wave. Canon Izuku would have frozen, dropping his notebook, screaming as the sludge forced its way down his throat. Dragon raised Izuku moved. He didn't run backward. That would be a foot race against a fluid dynamic he couldn't win. Instead, Izuku ducked low, ripping a small, spherical object from his belt. He threw it hard at the ground right in front of the advancing wave of sludge. Pop! A flashbang detonated. It wasn't an incendiary explosive, but the sheer, blinding light and deafening concussive crack echoed violently in the confined space of the underpass. The sludge villain shrieked, the eyes within the mass squeezing shut as the fluid recoiled instinctively from the sudden shockwave. Ah! My eyes! You little brat! Using the brief opening, Izuku engaged his grappling bracer. With a flick of his wrist, a high-tensile wire tipped with a weighted magnetic claw shot upward, wrapping securely around a heavy steel support pipe running along the ceiling of the underpass. Izuku hit the retraction button, hoisting himself 10 feet into the air, completely avoiding the second, desperate swipe of the sludge. Hanging from the pipe, Izuku reached to his waist and unclipped 2 collapsible stun batons, snapping them to their full, crackling length. Fluid-based body, Izuku muttered to himself, his brain working at hyperspeed. Physical strikes are useless. Electricity will conduct through the water content, but it might not disrupt the core consciousness unless I hit the eyes or the mouth. Get down here! The villain roared, reforming and stretching upward to grab him. Izuku swung his legs, preparing to detach the grapple and drop-kick the villain with the electrified batons, when the manhole cover suddenly exploded upward into the ceiling with the force of a cannonball. Have no fear, you are safe! A voice like booming thunder shook the very foundations of the bridge. Izuku froze, his eyes widening. Stepping out of the sewer, glowing with an almost divine aura of golden light, was a mountain of a man. The massive muscles, the bright costume, the iconic, unyielding smile. Because I am here, All Might announced. The sludge villain panicked, whipping around. All Might? How did you? Texas smash. All Might didn't even make contact. He merely pulled back his fist and punched the air. The resulting air pressure was akin to an F5 tornado being birthed in a confined space. The wind howled, violently tearing the sludge villain apart on a molecular level, splattering the green viscous fluid against the concrete walls and completely incapacitating it. The gale-force wind threatened to tear Izuku from his grapple line. He braced himself, swinging wildly before finally hitting the release button and dropping gracefully to the ground, landing in a perfect 3-point crouch. All Might stood amidst the scattered sludge, holding 2 large plastic soda bottles he had apparently procured. With terrifying speed, he began scooping up the unconscious villain's remains, sealing them inside. Apologies, young man. All Might boomed, turning to Izuku. I did not mean to involve you in my villain hunt. But it seems you were handling yourself quite well. Excellent reflexes. Izuku stood up, clicking his stun batons off and holstering them. His heart was hammering against his ribs. It was All Might. The #1 hero. The symbol of peace. Despite all his tactical training, the fanboy in him was screaming, "All Might-san," Izuku breathed, offering a deep, respectful bow. "It is an absolute honor. I'm a huge fan. Your handling of the toxic chainsaw incident 5 years ago revolutionized disaster mitigation protocols." All Might paused, blinking in surprise. Usually, teenagers just screamed or asked for a selfie. Well, yes. Thank you. You have a sharp mind, young man. Izuku quickly reached into his bag, pulling out Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 17 and a pen. "Sir, I know you're in a rush to transport the villain to the police, but could you possibly sign this? It would mean the world to me." "Of course." All Might laughed, taking the notebook. He flipped to a blank page and signed his massive, sprawling signature across 2 full pages. "A fine addition to your notes. Keep up the good work, and perhaps I will see you in the field one day." All Might handed the book back, giving Izuku a massive thumbs up. He patted his pockets, ensuring the bottles were secure in his oversized cargo pants. "Now, I must be off. Pro-heroes are constantly fighting time as well as enemies." All Might bent his knees, the concrete cracking beneath his boots. With a mighty leap, he rocketed out of the underpass, ascending into the sky like a launched missile. Izuku watched him go, clutching his notebook to his chest. He smiled, feeling a surge of pure inspiration. He looked down at the signature. It was flawless. "Wait," Izuku thought, his smile faltering. He looked down at the ground where All Might had been standing. There, lying in the shadows of the underpass, was one of the 2 plastic soda bottles. The one containing the eyes and mouth of the sludge villain. It must have slipped from All Might's pocket during the explosive force of his jump. Izuku's blood ran cold. He stared at the bottle. The sludge inside was beginning to stir, pressing weakly against the plastic cap. "Oh no," Izuku whispered. He lunged for the bottle, intending to grab it and run straight to the nearest police station. But as his fingers brushed the plastic, the villain's mouth pressed against the side of the bottle. With a wet pop, the immense pressure inside caused the cap to blow off. The sludge exploded outward, catching Izuku squarely in the chest and throwing him backward into the wall. The impact knocked the wind out of him, and the villain, furious and desperate, surged out of the underpass, slithering rapidly into the drainage grates of the street above. "Damn it!" Izuku coughed, scrambling to his feet. He ran to the mouth of the underpass. The villain was gone, moving through the city's plumbing. Izuku didn't hesitate. He engaged his headset comms, tied directly to the Ryukyu agency dispatch. "This is Tatsuma Actual. I need local police bands routed to my earpiece immediately. Suspect is a fluid-based mutation, highly evasive, currently in the subterranean drainage system heading toward the Tatooine shopping district. Alert all local heroes." He broke into a dead sprint. 10 minutes later, the Tatooine shopping district was a war zone. Izuku smelled the smoke before he saw the flames. The sky above the alleyways was choked with thick, black soot. Screams echoed over the roar of explosions. Izuku pushed his way through the gathering crowd of onlookers, his analytical mind processing the chaos. He reached the front of the police barricade and took in the scene. It was a disaster. The sludge villain had re-emerged, much larger this time, likely having absorbed water from the sewers. It occupied the center of the intersection, surrounded by a ring of intense fire. The fires were being fueled by massive, erratic explosions originating from the center of the sludge mass. "It's no use." Death Arms, a strength-based pro-hero, shouted, coughing on the smoke. "I can't get a grip on him. It's like punching pudding, and I can't use my quirk." Empty Lady complained, standing uselessly at the edge of the 2-lane street. "I need at least a 2-lane road to expand safely. I'll crush the civilians." Kamui Woods was trying to approach, but the flames forced him back. "My wood will ignite. We need water-based heroes." "Where is Backdraft?" "Backdraft is holding the fire line on the east block," a police officer yelled. "He can't move." Izuku stared at the center of the sludge. Through the swirling, viscous green mass, he saw a face, ash blonde hair, crimson eyes wide with absolute, primal terror. Katsuki Bakugo. The sludge villain had him trapped, forcing the fluid down his throat, using Bakugo's explosive quirk to keep the heroes at bay. Bakugo was suffocating. His explosions were becoming wild, unfocused, and panicked. He's running out of oxygen, Izuku deduced, pulling his stopwatch from his pocket. A human of Katsuki's athletic build and adrenaline state can survive perhaps 2 minutes of asphyxiation before permanent brain damage. It's been at least a minute since the fire started. The pros are waiting for a hero with a favorable quirk matchup. But there is no time. Izuku looked around. Death Arms was holding the crowd back. Kamui Woods was hesitating. Empty Lady was useless. A hero, Ryukyu had told him once, her golden eyes blazing, is someone who acts when everyone else is waiting. Izuku didn't throw his backpack blindly. He calmly unclipped the sternum strap and let the heavy bag drop to the pavement. He unzipped his uniform jacket, letting it fall away, revealing his dark green, Kevlar-weave tactical shirt and the heavy utility belt strapped across his waist. He didn't scream. He didn't hesitate. He ducked under the police tape. "Hey! Kid! Get back here! Are you crazy?" Death Arms roared, reaching out to grab him. Izuku was too fast. He sprinted past the burly hero, his boots hitting the burning asphalt with rhythmic precision. He wasn't running wildly. He was counting his steps, analyzing the spread of the flames, and mapping a path through the inferno. "You again?" The sludge villain roared, its massive eyes zeroing in on Izuku. "I'll drown you this time." The villain swung a massive, whip-like tendril of sludge directly at Izuku's head. "Engage," Izuku muttered. He hit a button on his right bracer. A heavy, weighted bola line shot out, wrapping tightly around a street lamp to his right. He gripped the line and swung outward, the sludge whip crashing harmlessly into the asphalt where he had just been standing. Using the centrifugal force of his swing, Izuku unclipped a heavy, metallic canister from his belt and hurled it directly at the villain's left eye. It wasn't a notebook. It was a military-grade tear gas grenade. The canister hit the sludge and detonated. A thick, white cloud of caustic gas erupted directly into the villain's face. "Ack! My eyes! It burns!" The villain shrieked, the sludge churning violently in agony. The grip on Bakugo loosened just a fraction, enough for Bakugo's mouth to clear the fluid. Bakugo gasped desperately for air, coughing up green slime. He opened his red eyes, expecting to see All Might or Endeavor. Instead, he saw green hair. "Deku?" Bakugo choked out, his mind unable to process the sight. "What the hell are you doing? I'm saving your life, Katsuki, so shut up and listen to me," Izuku ordered. His voice wasn't a stutter. It was a commanding, authoritarian bark that cut through Bakugo's panic like a knife. It was the voice of a commander on a battlefield. Izuku landed in a crouch, instantly drawing his twin stun batons and clicking them to maximum voltage. "Your explosions are feeding the fire and limiting the hero's approach. Stop firing wildly. I need you to point both your palms straight down at your own feet and fire a continuous, concentrated blast. Are you insane?" Bakugo yelled. "I'll blow my own legs off. The sludge is mostly water. It will absorb the concussive force and rapidly boil, creating a steam pocket. Do it now, or you die in 40 seconds. Izuku didn't wait for Bakugo to argue. He charged forward, straight into the mass of the villain. The villain brought down 2 massive fists of sludge, aiming to crush the boy. Izuku crossed his batons above his head, the electrical current creating a momentary, repulsive magnetic field that deflected the worst of the liquid impact, though the sheer weight forced him to his knees. "Do it, Katsuki!" Izuku screamed over the roar of the fire. Bakugo, acting purely on survival instinct and the sheer, overpowering authority in Izuku's command, aimed his palms straight down into the sludge encompassing his waist and legs. Boom! It wasn't a standard explosion. Bakugo focused it, channeling the heat and kinetic force directly downward. Izuku's physics calculation was flawless. The intense heat instantly vaporized a massive portion of the fluid surrounding Bakugo's lower half. A geyser of superheated steam erupted upward, forcing the villain to scream and physically recoil from the blistering temperature. The grip on Bakugo shattered. "Sarah maneuver!" Izuku yelled to himself. He leaped forward, diving into the billowing steam. He grabbed Bakugo by the collar of his uniform with his left hand, and with his right, he fired his grappling hook directly up at the fire escape of the adjacent building. The winch screamed as it hauled both boys out of the churning mass of steam and sludge, pulling them out of the inferno and depositing them roughly onto the second-story metal grate. Bakugo collapsed, coughing violently, gasping for the oxygen he had been denied. Izuku landed on one knee, his chest heaving, his tactical shirt singed, and a burn mark searing across his left cheek. Below them, the sludge villain recovered from the steam blast. Realizing it had lost its hostage and its shield, it looked up at the fire escape with murderous intent. "I'll kill you! I'll tear you to pieces!" The villain roared, amassing all its fluid into one gigantic, towering wave intended to crush the entire side of the building. Izuku stood up, moving to place himself between Bakugo and the villain. He reached to his belt. He was out of flashbangs, out of gas. He only had his batons, and that wave was too massive to deflect. I miscalculated the recovery time, Izuku thought, his mind racing, trying to find an out. "Mom! I'm sorry." Suddenly, the air pressure in the alleyway dropped so fast Izuku's ears popped. A shadow fell over them. "I am pathetic." Izuku looked up. Standing on the railing of the fire escape above them, blood leaking from the corner of his mouth, his golden hair plastered to his forehead with sweat, was All Might. The symbol of peace looked down at Izuku. The hero's blue eyes were filled with an immense, profound emotion. Shame. Ah. An absolute resolve. "I told you what makes a hero," All Might boomed, his voice echoing with a power that vibrated in Izuku's very bones. "And yet I stood by and watched, bound by my own limits, while you, a young man with no power, rushed into the flames to do what the professionals could not." All Might dropped from the railing, interposing himself between the boys and the rising wave of sludge. He drew his right arm back, the sheer muscular tension tearing the fabric of his white t-shirt. Pro heroes must always be willing to put their lives on the line. All Might's fist shot forward. Detroit. The air didn't just move, it shattered. Smash! The impact of the punch didn't even require physical contact. The shockwave annihilated the sludge villain, scattering its liquid form across a 3-block radius in microscopic droplets. The resulting wind pressure was so intense it blew out the fires in the alleyway instantly, shattered every window on the block, and sent a vertical column of air rocketing into the sky. Izuku clung to the fire escape railing, shielding Bakugo with his body as the gale force wind threatened to rip them away. Then, just as quickly as it began, it was over. Silence fell over the shopping district, broken only by the tinkling of falling glass and the sound of rain. Izuku looked up. The updraft from All Might's punch had literally altered the local weather pattern, causing a brief, localized rain shower to wash over the scorched street. All Might stood amidst the rain, steam rolling off his massive body. He looked back at Izuku, offering a small, exhausted smile before turning to the awestruck crowd. The aftermath was a chaotic blur of police sirens, paramedics, and shouting reporters. Bakugo was currently sitting on the back of an ambulance, an oxygen mask over his face. He was being praised by Death Arms and Kamui Woods for his incredible quirk and his endurance, though Bakugo didn't look proud. He kept shooting dark, complicated glares across the street. Across the street, Izuku was leaning against a police cruiser, allowing a paramedic to apply burn ointment to his cheek. He was not being praised. "Do you have any idea how foolish that was?" Death Arms was bellowing, pointing a thick, reprimanding finger at Izuku. "You're a quirkless kid. You charged into a hostage situation with no backup, no quirk, and unlicensed support gear. You could have gotten yourself and the hostage killed." Kamui Woods nodded sternly in agreement. "We had the situation contained. We were waiting for a favorable quirk matchup. Your interference was highly illegal and suicidal." Izuku thanked the paramedic quietly, stood up, and looked the two pro-heroes dead in the eye. He didn't look like a scolded child. He looked like a disappointed auditor. "Contained?" Izuku repeated, his voice cold and devoid of any childish deference. "With respect, sir, The hostage was completely submerged in a fluid-based anomaly, incapable of respiration. According to my stopwatch, Katsuki had approximately 64 seconds before suffering hypoxic brain injury. You were waiting for a water-based hero, but Backdraft was occupied, and the nearest alternative was Manuel in Hosa City, a 15-minute flight. Death Arms blinked, taken aback by the clinical breakdown. Well, furthermore, Izuku interrupted smoothly. Article 9 of the Good Samaritan Heroic Intervention Clause allows a civilian to utilize defensive equipment to preserve life if pro-heroes on the scene are physically incapable of action, provided the civilian does not utilize a quirk. I used a flashbang, a tear gas canister, and basic physics to create an opening. I did your job because you were standing around watching a boy choke to death. Kamui Woods bristled, stepping forward. Listen here, you arrogant little. A shadow eclipsed the setting sun. The air above the street suddenly grew heavy, oppressive, and thick with the smell of ozone and burning embers. A sound resonated from the sky, a deep, thrumming vibration that rattled the windows of the police cruisers. The reporters stopped taking pictures. The police officers reached for their sidearms. Death Arms and Kamui Woods froze, looking upward. Descending from the clouds, her massive, pale gold scales catching the fading sunlight, was the number 9 hero. Ryukyu. She didn't land gently. She hit the asphalt with the force of a meteor, cratering the street right between Izuku and the two scolding pro-heroes. She was in her full, colossal dragon form. Her wings flared out, spanning the width of the entire street, casting Izuku in her protective shadow. She lowered her massive, horned head, her jaw parting to reveal teeth the size of daggers. She exhaled, a blast of hot, smoking air blowing Kamui Woods' cape back. Her golden, slitted eyes pinned the two heroes with a look of absolute, maternal fury. Were you? Ryukyu rumbled, her voice vibrating the asphalt. Just yelling at my son? Death Arms went entirely pale, taking a step back and raising his hands defensively. Ryukyu. We didn't know he was your kid. We were just explaining the dangers of civilian interference. My son! Ryukyu snarled, her tail thrashing dangerously against the street lamp. Analyzed the lethal scenario, calculated the timeline of death, engaged the target utilizing non-lethal suppression tactics, extracted the hostage, and survived an encounter with an A-rank villain while you two stood on the sidelines playing traffic cop. She took a massive step forward, forcing the heroes to back up further. If I ever hear of you lecturing my hatchling on heroism again, she growled, I will personally review your agency's field efficacy ratings with the commission. Am I understood? Yes, ma'am. Crystal clear, Ryukyu. Kamui Woods squeaked, quickly bowing and dragging Death Arms away to deal with the press. Once they were gone, Ryukyu immediately shifted. The massive dragon vanished, replaced by the tall, beautiful blonde woman in the crimson trench coat. She practically threw herself at Izuku, falling to her knees and grabbing him by the shoulders, her eyes frantically scanning his body for injuries. Izuku! Are you hurt? The dispatcher said you engaged a fluid villain. Let me see your arms. Mom, I'm fine, Izuku promised, his stoic, professional demeanor instantly melting into soft, embarrassed affection. He allowed her to check the burn on his cheek. It's just a scrape. My Kevlar held up, and All Might handled the rest. Ryuko sighed, a shuddering breath of profound relief escaping her lips. She pulled him into a crushing hug, burying her face in his green hair. You gave me a heart attack, little Drake. Don't you ever scare me like that again. I was patrolling 2 districts over and broke the sound barrier getting here. I'm sorry, Izuku mumbled into her coat. But I couldn't just watch him die. I know, Ryuko whispered fiercely. I know. And I am so damn proud of you. As they pulled away, Izuku heard the crunch of footsteps on the glass-strewn pavement. Excuse me. Ryukyu-san? Ryuko stood up, instantly slipping back into her professional, imposing posture, keeping Izuku slightly behind her. She turned to see All Might walking toward them. The massive hero was no longer smiling his trademark, booming grin. He looked incredibly serious. All Might, Ryuko said respectfully, offering a slight bow. Thank you for intervening. I apologize for my son's recklessness. I have trained him in close-quarters combat, but he shouldn't have been in that situation. All Might stopped a few feet away, his piercing blue eyes shifting from the dragoon hero to the quirkless boy standing behind her. Ryukyu, there is no need for apologies, All Might said, his voice surprisingly soft. In fact, I am the one who must apologize. And thank him. All Might knelt down on one knee, bringing himself closer to Izuku's eye level. Young Tatsuma, All Might said. When I saw that boy struggling in the sludge, my body, due to a past injury, had reached its limit. I told myself I couldn't move. I made excuses. But then I saw you. Izuku stared, wide-eyed. The symbol of peace was kneeling before him. You, a young man with no quirk, threw yourself into the fire when I hesitated, All Might continued, his voice trembling with raw emotion. You taught me a lesson today. There are stories about every great hero, how they became great. Most have one thing in common, their bodies moved before they had a chance to think. Izuku's breath hitched. Tears, hot and unbidden, sprang to his eyes. It was the one phrase he had waited his entire life to hear. The phrase his mother, Inko, hadn't known how to say. The phrase society told him was impossible. You can be a hero, All Might declared. Izuku covered his mouth with his scarred hand, a choked sob escaping his throat. Ryuko placed a gentle, grounding hand on his shoulder, her own golden eyes shining with pride and a fierce, protective warmth. All Might stood back up, looking at Ryuko. The severity in his expression returned, replaced by a heavy, almost desperate weight. Ryukyu, All Might said quietly, ensuring the reporters at the edge of the barricade couldn't hear. Your son has the heart of a true hero. The heart of a lion, or perhaps a dragon. But there is a limit to what he can achieve with support gear alone against the monsters that are coming. Ryuko's eyes narrowed slightly, her draconic instincts picking up a shift in the air. What are you saying, All Might? All Might looked left, then right, ensuring absolute privacy. I am saying that I am looking for a successor. And I believe I have found him. Izuku froze, his tear-filled eyes snapping up to the towering hero. A successor? All Might nodded. I need to speak with both of you. In private. Concerning a matter of national security, and the inheritance of my power. Ryuko stared at the number one hero for a long, calculating moment. She looked down at Izuku, who looked utterly bewildered, and then back at All Might. My agency, Ryuko said smoothly, her voice betraying none of the shock she was feeling. Top floor penthouse. The glass is soundproof and shielded against thermal and audio surveillance. Can you be there in an hour? I will be there, All Might promised. He gave Izuku one last, meaningful look, before turning and leaping into the sky, disappearing into the twilight. Izuku stood there in the ruined street, the golden scale resting heavily against his chest, his mind struggling to process the impossible words he had just heard. Inheritance of my power. Ryuko squeezed his shoulder. Come on, Izuku. Let's go home. It seems the Horde is about to get a very important visitor.